The goal at Texas to win a national championship, right? I think that's fair to say as I look around a room that's empty. I think it's fair to say that the goal at Texas should be nothing short of competing for national championships. Well, you remember on October 10th, when we were leading into that weekend of October 10th at least, and the Red River Shootout was coming up, and it was the Oklahoma, Texas, one team really wants to win, the other team has to win sort of deal, and that's how we framed it, and I framed it that way for a reason. I rarely talk about must-win games. I save that phrase to use only in the most intentional manners. Well, I was intentional that week. And I told you, I think Texas and Tom Herman, they have to win this game. It'd be nice if Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma could, but Texas has to win the game. Well, they didn't win the game. That has consequences. As I told you, I'm not some dude who's going to say they got to win the game and then they lose and I say, well, dust it off, try again next week. No, I thought that set a ball in motion that's eventually going to lead to coaching changes at the head coaching position and below at Texas. Still believe that. That's only been furthered by the events of the last 48 hours. We'll get into that in just a second. But I also want to tell you, because I don't think I went down this road in totality the week of that game. We just didn't have time. There were a lot of whispers. Those of you, if you're a member over at Horns 24/7, I'm sure the guys and girls over there were talking about that. But there were whispers in the recruiting industry that the negative recruiting had really been on the uptick against Texas. And listen, for lack of a better term, I say negative recruiting, because I don't even think it's negative recruiting if you and I are going heads up for a kid. You're Texas and I'm anyone else. And I walk in your living room and I say, hey, they're not doing so hot. Look at their record. Look at the kind of discombobulated nature in which the entire program is operating. Football team in front of your eyes on Saturday, behind the scenes. Do you really think Tom Herman's going to be there for a long time? I don't even think that's all that unfair. So I don't even know that that's all that negative unless you consider reality to be negative. Reality right now is a negative for Texas. So if you present the reality, maybe that is negative recruiting. So all the while, now here's the other backstory. As they lost the Oklahoma game, it went from kind of a trickle to a flood of negative recruiting. And all of a sudden it became the overwhelming majority that thought it's not a matter of if anymore, but when Tom Herman's going to be gone there. So then I would present that to some of my Texas buddies back home and a few that I even know here, and I would get this response. It wasn't even necessarily that this was their argument, maybe some of them, but others were playing devil's advocate. And so when I would suggest that Texas may be moving on from Herman at the end of the year, I would get this in return. Well, you can't upset the recruiting class. I mean, look at their upcoming recruiting class and this was the 2022 Firewall, as it became known in these circles, at least on Late Kick. The 2022 Firewall was Quinn Ewers. The Firewall has fallen, people. Quinn Ewers decommitted from Texas yesterday. Mike Roach put out a very, very comprehensive update on this yesterday afternoon. Let me give you a little timeline. I was running this by Colin. So yesterday afternoon, Mike Roach over on Horns 24/7 essentially tells you what's coming in a guarded language, because he had to use that. But he essentially, he telegraphed all of this. It was coming. They're very dialed in over there, if you haven't already noticed. And so I tweeted that article. Some dude, sure enough, pops up under there and says, this is just clickbait. About 5 minutes later, Quinn Ewers decommits. That dude, suspiciously nowhere to be found, suspiciously absent. So sometimes that clickbait, it can become real in quite a hurry. Quinn Ewers decommits. In the last minute, let me turn the paper sideways. I had to write it sideways. Faison Wilson, 4-star wide receiver for the 2022 class, already decommitted. So that's 2 in 24 hours. Don't know where that ends, but Ewers was monumental. Now, that is a tsunami as much as one player can equal. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. I thought it was a red flag, to be honest with you, when they couldn't lock down the Brockermeyer twins, among others. And those are legacy recruits in Fort Worth, Texas, that Texas cannot get to stay home. Those kids grew up looking for any reason to play for Texas. They're committed to Alabama. They're going to sign with Alabama in December. So previously, I was told, hey, you can't fire Tom Herman, can't get rid of him because of recruiting. I don't have anyone telling me that anymore. So I'm searching now. Anyone out there who wants to remain in the devil's advocate category, I want you to tell me, what's the argument? Because that one's irrelevant. I mean, recruiting is leaking. It is leaking really bad right now. Ewers also, according to Mike Roach, after he decommitted, he shared this little tidbit. I don't know if you guys read this. I know you guys probably in Longhorn circles did. Mike Roach said not only did he decommit, but he had been told Quinn Ewers was discussing with other players and Texas commits about his decision-making ahead of time. That's not good, friends. That's no bueno. So then I go back over, as I was about to walk over to the building. We do the show in a different building than our office is in. And so I had to walk through the whatever's happening outside, a tropical depression at this point. And so right before I did that, I was checking out Chip Brown's update. Bobby Burton put one up over there. So a lot of folks really close to the Texas program. Now, Chip Brown's just quoting what people have told him. So this is not a knock on Chip Brown. He did phenomenal reporting on this. But I want to read you a quote from the Insider article. You can check out the whole thing over on Horns 24/7. This is a quote from a high-placed source in Austin. Saturday's game at Oklahoma State and really every game left on the schedule is an indicator of where this program is. And I look at that. And I think to myself, are you serious? There's someone out there who has a fully functioning brain and working eyeballs that after all this still needs an indicator? Like this Saturday is going to show this person something that they don't already know? You've got recruits fleeing their home state of Texas left and right. The culture is a mess. You've got chronic penalty and turnover issues. Procedurally, they are a joke in big games and in games they're favored by double digits in. There's zero consistency week to week in the program. And Oklahoma just came in there, benched their starting quarterback during the middle of their rivalry game against you, and still found a way to win. You were having to come from behind to even try and force overtime against them. So if those aren't indicators, I don't know what in the world's going to happen Saturday that's an indicator, short of Tom Herman walking out and just saying, I give up, and waving a literal white flag. What is the absolute best case? Again, for people who are still on the fence here, this is not my program. This is your program. You guys have ownership in it. I don't. I'm just standing here in Nashville, and I'm looking over there, and I'm watching, and I'm wondering, what is the best case? For people who are still in the Herman camp, that's great, that's fine. You got an opinion same as mine. Yours is probably worth more than mine. You're an actual Texas fan. But I just want to ask you, what is the best case? If you were to have things go 10 out of 10, best case scenario, I want you to think about what that would mean long term for Tom Herman at Texas. Just you define it, whatever best case is. And then picture that, and then I still want you to be honest with me. Is it even close to Alabama and Nick Saban? Is it even close to Ryan Day and Ohio State? Is it even close to Dabo and Clemson in one of their normal years? Because every year is elite for those programs. So their normal is elite. Is their best case at Texas with Tom Herman? Is the best case elite at this point? Have you ever seen any indication of that? Have you ever seen an indication that consistency in excellence would be the hallmark of that program under Tom Herman? I haven't. So I'm asking you, I don't think anyone has seen it. I want to know, where would it come from? It's got to come from someplace that we haven't seen before. Now, my read on Chip's story, I read you that quote there, but that was a quote. My own individual read on Chip's story was, I don't think Tom Herman, he doesn't have success on the field first off. And off the field, it's very obvious he doesn't have the same crew of high-level net worth individuals, or as you might know them, donors and boosters, slapping him on the back after these losses as Mac Brown did during the darker times for him in Austin. That's how he was able to weather the storm. That's why, among other reasons, I don't believe Tom Herman will be able to. But you got the losing, you got the bad mismanagement and mishandling, perceived or reality, of the whole Eyes of Texas situation, and not being particularly loved by the right people. I don't know where that equity is. Like, I don't know. There's a lot on this side of the scale. I don't know what balances that out. So I think, based on what I was reading from Chip, I think it just validates what I thought going into the Oklahoma game. This was decided that afternoon. Decisions weren't finalized. There weren't moves made that afternoon. But you mark my words, when we see how this thing ends for Texas this year, and ultimately we're getting ready for the start of the 2021 season, whatever they look like at that point, that will have been precipitated by the loss to Oklahoma, among other things, on October 10th, the year of our Lord, 2020.